There is a house in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, that has never had an air conditioner. Not a window unit, not a central system, not a portable fan plugged into a wall. The family that lives there has occupied that property for 5 generations, and not one of them has ever paid a cooling bill. The summer I visited, the outside temperature was 94 degrees, with humidity so thick it felt like breathing through a wet cloth. Inside that house, it was 61 degrees. No hum of a compressor, no vent pushing refrigerated air. Just cool, still, comfortable air that cost the family absolutely nothing to produce. The system responsible for that temperature was built by the current owner's great-grandfather sometime around 1910. It has required 2 repairs in over a century of continuous operation. The total materials cost for those 2 repairs combined was less than $30. The system is buried in the ground 6 feet below the foundation of that house, and it works for the same reason the inside of a cave is always cool in July. Not because someone built a machine to make it cool, because the earth itself is cool at that depth, and has been cool at that depth every summer since before the house was built, and will remain cool at that depth every summer after the house is gone. This is not a complicated idea. It is such a simple idea that the moment you understand the physics behind it, you will ask yourself the same question. I asked myself standing in that 61-degree farmhouse on a 94-degree afternoon. Why does every house in America not already do this? The answer involves a corporate decision made in the early 1930s, a single sentence in a technical manual, and an industry worth $29 billion a year that has spent nearly a century making sure the question never gets asked loudly enough to matter. Let me start with the physics, because the physics is what the industry cannot argue with. 6 feet below the surface of the ground, soil temperature stops responding to seasonal variation above it. This is not a local phenomenon specific to certain regions or certain soil types. It is a fundamental property of thermal mass at depth that applies everywhere on Earth. The Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which operates as the Department of Energy's primary research facility, has measured ground temperature at 6-foot depth in cities across the United States. Chicago holds at 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Denver sits at 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Minneapolis at 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Atlanta at 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Phoenix at 67 degrees Fahrenheit. And across the farmland of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where that 5-generation family has been farming since the 1700s, the ground temperature holds between 54 and 56 degrees Fahrenheit every single day of every single year, regardless of what the summer does to the surface. The reason comes down to the thermal mass of soil itself. Soil weighs between 100 and 125 pounds per cubic foot. Moving that mass even a single degree requires between 20 and 30 BTUs of energy per cubic foot. When summer heat begins working its way down from the surface in June, it moves through that dense, resistant mass slowly. By the time the heat has traveled 6 feet down, September has arrived and the surface has already begun cooling again. The heat chasing its way into the earth never arrives because the season changes faster than heat can move through soil. The result is a thermal lock. It is a permanent, self-renewing, free source of 55 degrees Fahrenheit that exists beneath every property in the country and asks nothing in return for being used. The Amish did not discover this. No single person discovered it. Every civilization that has ever dealt with summer heat and needed to preserve food or maintain a comfortable living space eventually figured it out independently because the physics is unavoidable. The Persians were building underground cooling chambers called yakchals. 2,400 years ago, using the Earth's constant subterranean temperature to store ice through desert summers that regularly exceeded 120 degrees at the surface. The Romans channeled cool underground air through the foundations of their villas. Native American communities in the Southwest built semi-subterranean dwellings for 8 millennia, specifically because below-grade construction stayed naturally cool without any mechanical assistance. Korean and Chinese builders developed similar approaches through entirely independent engineering traditions. On every continent, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, human beings arrived at the same conclusion. The Earth stores coolness. If you connect the air inside your home to the air at 6 feet below the surface, the Earth cools your home for free. The Amish of Pennsylvania and Ohio inherited this knowledge from their German and Swiss ancestors, who had used variations of the system for centuries before emigrating to America. When they settled Lancaster County in the early 1700s, they brought those practices with them. They built root cellars dug 10 feet deep that held temperatures between 32 degrees and 40 degrees year-round, with no mechanical cooling of any kind. They built spring houses directly over natural groundwater flows, where the constant 54 degrees Fahrenheit water kept the interior between 50 and 58 degrees Fahrenheit through the hottest summers on record. They also built what they called the breadth of the floor, clay pipes buried beneath their foundations. Those pipes pulled outside air down through cool earth and delivered it into the living space at temperatures 30 to 40 degrees below the surface. The United States Department of Agriculture documented these clay pipe installations specifically in Holmes County and Lancaster County in a manual published in 1903. That document described the system in technical detail, noted its effectiveness, and identified it as a proven approach to residential cooling without mechanical assistance. It is 122 years old. The system it describes is still running under Amish farmhouses today. Now here is where the history gets instructive, in a way that should make every person paying a summer cooling bill genuinely angry. In 1902, Willis Carrier installed a mechanical air conditioning system in a Brooklyn printing plant to control humidity that was warping paper on the presses. The machine was an industrial dehumidifier. It was never designed for human comfort. It was designed to protect paper. But Carrier Corporation recognized immediately that a machine people could be convinced they needed in their homes was worth significantly more than a machine that protected printing equipment. By the 1920s, they had launched a marketing campaign called Weathermaker that repositioned mechanical air conditioning as the defining symbol of modern American progress and prosperity. Their marketing did not simply promote their product, it actively attacked the competition. Carrier Engineering Corporation materials from this period explicitly described passive and earth contact cooling methods as primitive, unsanitary, and incompatible with modern construction standards, not ineffective, unsanitary. They attached a health stigma to a cooling method that had been used by every advanced civilization in human history before a single Carrier compressor had ever been manufactured. Then in 1930, a Carrier Engineering Corporation technical manual included one sentence that effectively ended earth contact cooling as a mainstream residential option in the United States. That sentence said earth contact cooling was suitable only for cellars and food storage. One sentence in one corporate manual, and a cooling method with 2,400 years of documented human use across 6 continents vanished from American construction practice within a single generation. The people writing the building codes in the late 1920s and the early 1930s were the same people selling compressors. Passive cooling alternatives did not get banned from the model mechanical codes drafted in 1927. They simply did not appear in the document at all. A system that has no entry in the regulatory framework cannot be approved. A system that cannot be approved cannot be built. A system that cannot be built gets forgotten within a generation of architects, engineers, and contractors who were trained entirely within that framework. By 1980, fewer than 3% of American architecture programs taught any passive cooling strategy at all. An entire profession had been educated in a world where the Earth's constant subterranean temperature was not a resource, where the ground at 55 degrees, 6 feet below every yard in the country, was not a cooling system waiting to be connected, where the only acceptable answer to summer heat was a machine that required refrigerant, a compressor, a service contract, and a monthly utility bill that never stopped arriving. The Amish watched all of this happen and kept building clay pipes under their foundations. They did not need a building code to tell them the earth was cool at 6 feet. They could feel it every time they went into the root cellar. They did not need an architecture school to validate a system that had been keeping their farmhouses comfortable since their great-grandparents arrived from Germany. They kept building it because it kept working, and because the earth kept being cool at 6 feet regardless of what any corporate manual said about it. The family in Lancaster County whose farmhouse sat at 61 degrees Fahrenheit on an afternoon that reached 94 degrees Fahrenheit has paid exactly $0 in cooling costs across 5 generations of summer occupancy. The system their great-grandfather buried under the foundation in 1910 has outlasted every air conditioning unit Carrier Corporation has ever manufactured. It will still be working when every compressor currently running in Lancaster County has been hauled to a scrapyard. The residential cooling market in the United States is worth $29 billion per year. The average American homeowner spends between $1,200 and $1,800 per year on cooling costs. Over 20 years of home ownership, that is between $24,000 and $36,000 spent cooling a house that sits directly above a permanent free cooling source that has been there since before the house was built. The system that replaces all of that costs $25 in materials and a weekend of digging. The Earth has been waiting the entire time. In 2019, ASHRAE Technical Committee 6.8, the committee responsible for evaluating alternative building systems for inclusion in American construction standards, rejected a formal proposal to establish a performance approval pathway for residential earth contact cooling systems. Their stated reason was insufficient domestic performance data. They said this while Germany had 847 continuously monitored earth tube installations tracked by the Passive House Institute since 2005. They said this while ETH Zurich had completed a 15-year longitudinal study showing 0 measurable performance degradation across the entire monitoring period. They said this while the Cambridge Public Library in Massachusetts was already running 42 earth tubes beneath its foundation and consuming 51 to 56% less total energy than a comparable standard building. When researchers examined the membership composition of that committee, 67% of the seats were held by representatives of HVAC manufacturers. The people who decided the evidence was insufficient were the same people whose revenue disappears every time a buried pipe replaces a compressor. They did not find insufficient evidence. They found inconvenient evidence and attached a bureaucratic label to it that allowed them to set it aside without addressing a single data point. 2 years later, in 2021, the Building Officials Association of Florida formally opposed a state building code amendment that would have created a recognition pathway for passive cooling systems in residential construction. Their stated concern was inspection complexity. Florida homeowners pay an average of $400 per month in cooling costs for 6 months of every year. That is $2,400 every summer from a single household. Every passive cooling system approved in Florida is a central air unit that never gets sold, a refrigerant charge that never gets refilled, a service contract that never gets signed. The inspection complexity concern had nothing to do with inspections. Here is what you build. You need a run of land, a backyard, a side yard, a fence line, strip, the width of a driveway. Anything you can dig a trench along for 80 to 150 feet. The longer the run, the more thermal exchange occurs and the cooler the output. Dig that trench to 6 feet. At the bottom, lay a bed of coarse sand for direct soil contact. Into that sand, lay smooth wall PVC or HDPE pipe 4 to 6 inches in diameter. Smooth wall only. Corrugated pipe traps condensation and creates mold inside the buried run within a single season. Slope the pipe at a 2% grade toward a low drain point so any moisture that condenses on the interior pipe wall flows out and never pools. Pooled water is the only real failure mode this system has, and a 2% slope eliminates it completely. One end of the pipe terminates above ground at an intake fitted with a metal mesh screen. The other end comes through your basement wall or crawl space and connects to a simple inline fan drawing 40 to 60 watts. That fan is the only electrical component in the system. It uses less power than the bulb over your bathroom mirror. On an afternoon that reached 94 degrees Fahrenheit, air enters that intake at 94 degrees Fahrenheit, travels through 100 to 150 feet of pipe surrounded by earth, locked at 55 degrees, and arrives inside your house between 63 and 70 degrees. No compressor, no refrigerant, no chemical process. Physics, doing exactly what it has done under every Amish farmhouse in Lancaster County for over a century. The pipe costs between $18 and $25 for an 80-foot run. The fan costs $35. The mesh screen costs $4. The total system investment is $25 to $60 depending on what you already have in the garage. The pipe lasts 50 to 100 years. Your central air unit lasts 15 to 25 years before it needs full replacement and hauls itself to a landfill. The earth at 6 feet requires no replacement, no refrigerant, no service visit, no monthly bill. It simply stays at 55 degrees, the way it has stayed at 55 degrees since before your house existed, and will stay at 55 degrees long after your house is gone. The Amish great-grandfather, who buried clay pipe under that Lancaster County foundation in 1910, gave 5 generations of his family free cooling in perpetuity for the cost of one afternoon's digging. One afternoon and a handful of materials that cost less than a single month of the utility bill his neighbors have been paying every summer since. Drop your state in the comments and tell me what you pay for cooling each month. Tell me if you have a yard, a side yard, even a fence line, because the earth under that fence line is already at 55 degrees. It has been waiting the entire time. All it has ever needed is a pipe.